Hello friends, welcome back. In the last video, we talked about the various entities that are a part of a typical transaction life cycle. Now we'll look at a couple of those entities in a little bit more detail. So today, let's talk about the merchant and the acquirer and their role in the payment processing. We'll look at the merchant in a little bit detail, and we'll look at the following aspects about merchant processing, which is who's a merchant, types of merchants, and obligations of a merchant. So obligations of a merchant is basically certain things and certain conditions that the merchant has to comply with um, in norms with the standards that have been set for the payments. This is just in the interest of the security overall for the customer, for the merchant, and for all the parties involved. So who is a merchant? Merchant is someone who provides goods or services. Um, why does he provide goods and services? Obviously, we all understand that he is into business, some sort of a business, and he just makes a profit on selling the goods and the services. There's a very interesting definition about merchants that's given on Wiki. I'll probably take you there for a quick minute, and then we'll come back and look at the various types of merchants. So we are at the wiki page that explains a little bit about the merchant. I mean, it is just upon your interest if you want to go into the detail and read a little bit. This is just some history-based information, but nevertheless, I just thought to share this page with you, all of you. Wiki basically talks about two different kind of merchants. One is the wholesale merchant, and the second one is the retail merchant. As we all understand, wholesale is like when you deal with large quantities, and you deal with businesses directly rather than with the end consumers. Whereas in the retail, you are dealing with the consumers, and you deal in small quantities. Right. So coming back to the type of merchants, we have already seen the retail merchants. Let's talk about the internet and e-commerce now. So entities like Amazon, Alibaba, all big and medium and small internet and e-commerce based entities, right? Where you buy something online and then you enter your card details on the website directly. Then we have mobile merchant. Mobile merchant is a merchant who is actually not stationary. For example, food delivery trucks. You need to have a capability to process the payments on the go. That's basically mobile merchants. Telephone and mail order are the merchants where the merchants accept the payment information from the customer on phone or on email or maybe ordinary mail and then process it on behalf of the customer. So these are the different kind of merchants to look at. I would now like to touch briefly upon the last bullet point here, which is the obligations of a merchant. This is an important security related aspect and a compliance related aspect for the merchants, not just for the merchants, but for all the other players in the payment processing. Specifically, we'll just talk about the merchant for now. There is a body called as PCI. It's a Security Standards Council, and what you see on the screen now is the official website of this body. The purpose of this body is to put a compliance framework in place that takes care of the security aspects for the payment organizations and all the players that are a part of the payment processing. So, specifically, if you actually go to the Get Started section here, on the extreme right hand side, it talks about the merchant resources. So, if you are a new merchant who wants to provide this capability of, say, online transaction handling or point of swipe transaction handling to your customers, then you would need to follow the guidelines that are being laid by the Security Council. And so this section here that says merchant resources on the right hand side talks about all of those guidelines. There is also a self-assessment questionnaire that's given at the bottom. So if you click on that, then it it's basically a set of questions that assesses how secure the infrastructure is that you are providing to your customers and how secure the cardholder data of your customers is. As a merchant, it is your responsibility to provide not just the secure technical infrastructure to your customers, but also, say, if you're a brick and mortar store merchant, it is very important that even the physical infrastructure is kind of secure. When the customer is making a swipe of the card on the POS machine, he feels secure. You have to ensure that there is no leak or a potential security breach that could put the cardholder's sensitive information in jeopardy. So that's about the compliance and security related aspects for a merchant. So that's very important. If I get a chance, I'll probably make a separate video that will talk a little bit more in detail about how the PCI functions and what are the kind of things that PCI looks for when it comes to acquirers, merchants, and other entities. Now let's talk about the role of an acquirer and processor. So like I said in the first video, the merchant itself is not capable to take the money from the customers directly. There has to be an intermediary body between the merchant and the customer that does this. It's the merchant who has to provide this capability or service to the customer, right? So for example, if I am a merchant and I do not have the capability to process an online transaction or a point of swipe transaction, the customers may not be interested to purchase from me. So therefore, you need an entity like an acquirer and a processor to facilitate and process the payments. So let's look at who's an acquirer. So he maintains the merchant bank accounts. As a merchant, I take the services of an acquirer, and then it's the acquirer's responsibility to manage my account. The merchant has a contract with the acquirer. So obviously there are contractual obligations that bind the merchant and the acquirers. The acquirer processes the payments on behalf of merchants, right? So it's the acquirer who says, okay, you don't need to worry about the processing of the payment. You can focus on providing high quality services and goods to the customers, and then we do the processing for you. In return, we'll take some fee or charges on the transaction, okay? And and then we will settle the account for you. So there are some examples that I have listed here. Some very famous acquirers: First Data, WorldPay, Chase, Bank of America. You can again go to Google and read a little bit more about these acquirers and see what they do in a little bit more detail. Now let's look at the other entity, which is called as the payment processor. So some acquirers can process the transactions. They're big enough, right? So they have got IT systems in place. They have got the whole infrastructure that is sufficient for them to handle and process the transactions by themselves. But there are certain acquirers who are not big enough, and they may need the services of a third-party payment processor to process the the payments. Again, so the flow is like you have a merchant, then you have an acquirer, and then the acquirer may or may not need the services of a payment processor. Okay, so who's a payment processor? Payment processor is someone who facilitates and processes the transactions Acquirers may have the ability to process or may outsource this to a third party, as I already mentioned. Merchants do not directly talk with the processors. Usually, the merchants do not directly deal with the processors. They don't need to know who the processor is. Their job is just to communicate with the acquirer, and then the acquirer just does that on behalf of the merchant, the communication part with the processor. Processors are different from payment gateway, another entity. We will talk about this in the other forthcoming videos of how the payment processor is different from a payment gateway. But for now, just make a note of this. There is an entity called as payment gateway. Then you have some examples here for a payment processor. So some of these you would have already heard and rather you would be using it. Maybe the terminology payment processor might be coming as something new to you. But again, we have all seen PayPal and used. Some of you may have heard about Stripe, Google Pay, Apple Pay, Amazon Pay, very popular. All the major online e-commerce giants and the tech giants are also now into this arena of payment processing.
So there is a big pie and everybody has a share.
I hope you find this video useful. If you did, then please let me know in the comment section, and also let me know if you have any feedback to improve these videos. Thank you for watching.